Okay, and it should be recording now. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our environmental justice webinar hosted by Birmingham. My name is Hamera Sultan. I'm a public health consultant and also our director for FPA Birmingham, which is naturally Birmingham. It's great to see so many people here. I don't think I will ask people to introduce themselves kind of going around the virtual room, because there's quite a few of us, which is fantastic. But if I can ask people just to pop in the chat who they are, that would be really helpful, especially to kind of be making connections and so forth later. That would be super. So just a little bit of context as to why we're kind of doing this, really. We had a cohort event, which feels like about a year ago now, but it was only last month in October in Cork Abbey. And we had a few kind of breakout sessions, and I presented Birmingham's work on environmental justice, which is essentially all around how do we identify those areas of Birmingham which are in most need of intervention from an environmental perspective, and then what do we do about it, essentially. And I probably spoke for about maybe 15 minutes, and there was a lot of interest in this, a huge amount of interest, and we said, right, we'll put together a webinar and see who wants to come along, and actually quite a few of you have, which is fantastic. So just in terms of how we're going to kind of run the session, we've got 90 minutes. We're not going to be doing a huge amount of talking in Birmingham. That includes me as well. I'll try my best not to, because we want to really make this as much a discussion piece as possible, to get people's questions, comments, ideas for development, maybe think about how you can translate as well. We're going to have kind of three slots almost. We'll start off with Nick Grayson, who is a core member of our Future Parks team and Green City Manager for the city. We're talking a little bit about the whole context of this and why it's important. And it's great to see everybody here, but I know Valentin Samuel from DLUC, which always sounds like it should be like a grime band, but it's the Department for Levelling Up and Communities and Housing, the old MHCLG. And I'm so glad that I've said that. I've just remembered I'm being recorded. So, so it's really great that DLUC are here as well today, because we're really keen to start conversations about how we take this further than just Birmingham. So Nick will give the context, and then Stephen's going to be joining us from 1:15. So Stephen Jones is our GIS lead for the city. And I've already spoken to, I think, Natalie, who is a member of the GIS team in Bournemouth, and I think there's a few other GIS people probably on the call as well. So he'll talk to you about the nitty gritty. He's tried to keep it relatively simple, but I think is really happy to take questions and comments and so forth to read, for those of you who really want to get a bit more under the technical detail. So Stephen has to leave at 2, so we're going to pause there after he does his slot for about probably half an hour for questions and answers and so forth, and then I'll kind of finish off really with a bit of a, so yeah, we've identified there's an issue, we've got a methodology to identify those places that are in need, and so for me the really important part of this is not only in kind of producing our environmental justice map, which we'll take you through, but actually what we're doing with it, because we can all print out copies and pop them on our walls and what have you and stuff, and look at it, which nothing wrong with that, but it's really, really important, I think, for us that we use this to take action, and that is the whole point for me of doing this piece of work. So without much further ado, I am going to introduce Nick Grayson. If you want to come on, please, Nick. I feel like I don't know if anybody used to watch Stars in the Rise, and you kind of, the host, Matthew something or other, used to ask people to emerge from the doors. So I don't think Nick's going to be dressed up, but let's see. So I'm hoping I'm sure he's here. So I just want to fill some time, folks, while I get the presentation sorted. I'm sure Nick joined. Let me just. Oh, there he is. Hi, Nick. Sorry, I was just doing some, trying to make some really not very funny jokes, and I'm so glad you've turned up. Right, I'm happy to drive slides, Nick. So you just let me know when. So.
Okay. Can you hear me all right? Yes. Yes. Good. Okay. So this whole issue of Future Parks Accelerator is a fascinating one. I imagine that most of the people on the call are connected to the Future Parks Accelerator in some way, shape or fashion. And we're all sort of looking at the elephant from a different perspective and coming up with our own descriptions of the elephant in terms of what's the sustainable future of public parks in the UK, going back to answer that parliamentary inquiry session. And one of the things we've been looking at is the whole notion of green space in cities has been effectively siloed into a single profession, if you will, and really that's been with the parks services nationally. There has been some overlap in some cities where that's been in concert with a planning service. But over the years, that's a relatively recent phenomenon. And certainly in most cities, there's this separation in terms of green space is a management maintenance issue. It's not a strategic issue. And even if the planning services are involved, they're involved at one end of the spectrum and the maintenance and the management people are at the other end of the spectrum. And whether or not there's good communication is a question. But we've sort of decided that really we need to almost tear the model up that exists and re-question the whole remit of green space in cities and look at it from this much wider perspective of a livable city. Why are some cities around the world advancing in this green agenda way so much more successfully than others? And how is it that those examples don't exist in the UK? And what are the gaps in terms of the way in which we operate? So how do we actually think across those systems and bring the natural environment and park space into that whole outcomes focus of a city so that it's relevant to significant decision makers, not just the park service at one end and maybe the planners every 5 years when they have to review their documents. So we've set about mapping, internally mapping across the city how the natural environment plays into everyone else's agenda. And that's looking at it from this livable cities or climate resilient cities position. And through a series of pilots where each of those major outcome leads for the city, jobs and skills, health and well-being, children's futures, and housing, they each took a pilot as a lead in a neighbourhood in the city. And for 12 months, we worked alongside them and with them to try and see how we could mesh the natural environment with their usual business operations. And you know, the success of that is that we've now got a series of internal advocates in those departments. We call them green champions, but people who are there now banging the drum for the natural environment. But what we also exposed is that there were these gaps in city policy or city thinking, or gaps that needed to be closed to actually bring these agendas together. And they were around environmental justice as a key issue, health as a key issue, the engagements of citizens and sustainable finance. And what pulled all those together needed to be a new idea or a new view of how you could govern a city so that those qualities were best expressed and maintained. That led us on to these 5 city themes: green city, healthy city, fair city, involved city and valued city, the valued city representing the finance, but from a much broader perspective around these multiple values. So we think that this is quite a useful and transferable model of how cities around the world could actually just rethink and think about repositioning that whole issue of natural environment in cities. The one theme we're picking on today is environmental justice, and we want to go through that in some detail with you, but obviously these things are interlinked. And that's a vital takeaway from today, is that environmental justice is actually part of, an essential part of these other interlinked items. So yeah, next slide, please, Hamira. Environmental justice is a global term, actually. We're not aware of any other UK city that has an environmental justice map currently. There may be, and maybe they're calling them something different. But globally, for example, we've shared information over the years with Berlin, because we've got some university connections with Berlin and city connections. And in fact, Berlin introduced an environmental justice decision-making layer in 2014. So they've been using it for that length of time to affect their future forward planning and their response to need across the city. American cities have been doing this for some time, and as a topic, American cities are really running with this as a major significant item. What's really brought this to our focus in the UK, and globally it's accelerated, is a combination of two things. One is the COVID-19 pandemic, because you will have seen the global press on that in relation to people's ability to access green space at all, and maybe access green space of any quality, was something that was very quickly exposed as being completely disproportionate and hidden in plain sight from all of us, something we've known about for a long, long time, but have seemingly been unable to address. And this whole issue of access to nature. But actually, when you map a whole range of other issues, you also come up with very similar geographic patterns of need across a city. And the other big issue is climate and climate impact. And in fact, I would argue that environmental justice is a measure of climate impact. And certainly that's the way we're looking at it in Birmingham now, is that we're going to take this work and build it into a climate impact assessment for Birmingham. So that's where it's going to end up landing in city policy terms. Where it's come from is that when we started this process, MHCLG were the government lead, and they're responsible for the index of multiple deprivation, which I would hope you're all fairly familiar with. They have a series of domains, which then directs the way in which data is collected and then benchmarked from city to city and geographically from area to area within a city. What exists in that national data set at the moment, now it might be different from Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales, but so I ought to say England, is a domain called the living environment, but it's a series of proxy measures, important but proxy measures around quality of housing, air quality and road traffic accidents. So that whole issue of the COVID pandemic of accessing green space isn't reflected in the current index of multiple deprivation. And yet, both the government and every local authority in the country is preparing post-COVID recovery plans based on this set of data. So in other words, the very thing that got revealed through the international pandemic, has not been reflected in the index of multiple deprivation. So our recovery plans are going to follow business as usual. Now, to me, that seems completely wrong-headed. Here is an opportunity to introduce a new domain where we have shown that the data we're using is nationally available, shareable, usable by any city. If you capture access to green space, the urban heat island, and flood risk, and the one that's missing there is excess years life lost, which is a public health measure that every public health service captures. That's about the whole issue of your life expectancy being determined by your postcode rather than your genetic code. So living in the centre of the city might take 8 or 10 years off your life expectancy. And again, the environment has a huge impact on that. It's all about that Marmot's wider determinants of health. Those measures are all available. When you combine those and put them over the index of multiple deprivation, it takes you to a very different place of how you view your city. How we came about testing this, because you have to sort of build that up as a proof of concept, if you will, is we looked at the index of multiple deprivation for Birmingham, and then we looked at our green space provision. We then set a buffer of, the recommended distance of either 300, 400 or 500 metres, depending on what's in your local plan, and also the housing land allocation sites of where in the city we're proposing to bring in and deliver our housing targets. They're stippled red on that map, if you can see it. Next slide, please, Camilla. And if you zoom into one particular ward, that helps you to see that pattern in more detail. So you have the underlying base layer in grey, which is the index of multiple deprivation. This is one of our more deprived wards. It's Bawdsley and Highgate. You can see how little there is in the way of green space at the moment, because at the moment it's not meeting the national recommendation of 2 hectares per 1,000 population at all. But what you can also see is a lot of red squiggles, which is where we're planning to put our strategic housing and development allocation. And a projection piece of work that we did was, okay, if we build that out and we've got a growth in our population that's predicted anyway, the amount of green space to the new population, if we don't add any more to that ward, actually puts you at 60% below what the recommended levels are. So we're a local authority that's signed up to a climate declaration. We're a local authority that is obviously trying to address its housing needs. But we're also, as part of that climate declaration, we need to be looking at the ecological crisis as well as the carbon crisis. And they're both the same side of the same, opposite sides of the same coin. So we showed this graphic to our director of inclusive growth, and he basically admitted, well, this is a really good indication that we need to rethink this in terms of how do we solve this significant dilemma, because there's a number of things there that we've listed in our index. Flood risk for one, and the other one is urban heat island. Well, this ward already sits in the urban heat island, so we're going to densify it, and we're not going to offer any further relief. You look at the excess years life lost, you look at all these other indicators, and it's quite clear that business as usual approach is only going to make things worse. It's not actually responding to the challenges a 21st century city has to have. Now, there's also a flip side to this, in that I started by saying that parks and open spaces are the main holders of these estates in cities. Now, it could well be, not necessarily in this ward, but in other wards, we have these incidental areas of public open space. And because of the approach we've taken historically, which is a hierarchical approach led by high degrees of horticulture, rather than this whole livable city, green, resilient, climate-proof city approach. The thinking is we can let go some of these sites because they're not actually contributing very much. They're a bit of a hassle. They don't have any quality to them. We may as well sell them off for housing and help pay off some of the debt that the city's facing. So we have a double whammy here, whereby the portfolio holders for public open space have one mindset around maintenance, management, and managing their income targets or their debt on their budget. And we also have housing pressures brought to bear in a city. And that city has signed up to a climate declaration to be carbon neutral by 2030. And the two things just do not square. They just do not square. And it's because we're using the same methodologies and thought processes to try and solve 21st century problems. And I'm saying it's exactly the same for COVID recovery plans or levelling up agenda. We can't get to the right solution if we continue to use the same evidence-based and thought processes. And that's what our project is all about. It's challenging the existing mindsets and saying we need to come up with something different. Next slide, please. No.
Well,
I think this is where we move over to Stephen. So thank you for that. I hope it wasn't too long.
I'm going to bring in Stephen.
Hi, good afternoon. Right, I'm just going to quickly show myself on camera, and then I'm going to turn myself off because at the moment I've got a bad back and I'm probably going to have to stand up while I'm talking. So probably not a good idea for you to see the middle of my body as I wander around. So,
Okay.
so hiya, good afternoon. Nice to see you all, well, meet you all virtually. Yeah, I'm Stephen and I'm the GIS team lead here at Birmingham City Council. And I'm just going to briefly talk you over the work that we've done in developing the model to support this environmental justice work. So I'm just going to turn my camera off. Okay, so how did we actually approach this? Well, we worked closely as a team with Hamira, Nick and other people in actually developing what it was that we needed to deliver. And that is also subject to an internal team review as well. So we put it through our own internal review process. And at this stage, I must actually thank my lead analyst, David Pike, who did the majority of this work. David's not here today, so I've got the pleasure of actually talking you through this. Okay. As Nick mentioned, basically, we were interested in 5 factors. So access to green space, the urban heat island effect, index of multiple deprivation, risk of flood, excess years life lost. And the basic problem we had was how do we put all of those factors together into one measurable quantity that you could say this is a measure of environmental justice. For those of you that want to know a bit more technically about how this was done, basically most of this was done using map algebra, which basically means we rasterized a lot of data. So raster data is basically anything where data is organized in a regular cell basis. So that's the image that you're actually seeing on the screen, the screenshots of the maps, they are raster. Okay. And in this case, we actually created a raster surface at 20-meter interval across the whole of Birmingham for the purpose of the analysis. I think, is that my first slide, Hamira? It is. There should be some text there. So if you just click on. No, oh, there's no text on it. Okay, go back a slide then, please. Okay, so if we look at the slide, the image on the left is green space access. So the data sources for this were OS Green Space, and a variety of council-owned managed data sets. And we pulled all those together. And basically what we did was we calculated the straight line distance from a cell to the nearest open space where the open space was greater than 2 hectares. We calculated that distance. And then, as Nick said, we said that anything basically within 400 meters was given a value of 0, so it's considered to have good access. What we then did with all the other cells is we found the cell which was furthest from the open space had the greatest distance from an open space, and basically we then normalized our data down so that all our cells now occupy a range of 0 to 1. So 1 is the one where as you go up to 1 will have the maximum distance away from an open space. So we now have a surface of rectangular cells which have values between 0 and 1, where 1 is an indication of how good access is, in a very simple way to open space. The next one we considered was the urban heat island. For this, there is actually, I think on the slides, and we can provide you with the link to this, there is actually a paper that describes most of this. But this is basically, we took the 2014 daily mean urban heat island, which basically was a network of weather stations across what's called the Birmingham Urban Climate Laboratory, and data from the global human settlement data. And it estimates basically from a range of 0, where it's rural space, up to 1, where you have the maximum impact of the urban heat island. Okay. And again, we took that data and we normalized it again into 0 to 1 by dividing down by the maximum heat island value for the UK. So we normalized the Birmingham data to the rest of the UK in terms of the urban heat island. Next slide, please. On the left is the one that I think, as Nick said, you should all be familiar with, is the index of multiple deprivation. So we took the ONS 2011 census data, and we took the percentile value. So we used the percentile values rather than the actual value itself. And again, we put that into a range of 0 to 1 by dividing the percentile by 100 and then subtracting that from 1. So in this case, it now means 0 would be the most deprived LSOA and 1 is the least deprived LSOA. Flood risk data, again, so this comes from the Environment Agency. We have 2 data sets, flood zone 2, so that's where there's a 0.1 to 1% chance of a flood. They were given a nominal value of 0.5. Flood zone 3, which is where there's a greater than 1% probability of flooding, we gave that a value of 1. And all the other cells in Birmingham were given null data so that they didn't burn through into what we would call burn through into the analysis, so that they don't contribute anything where there's no flooding. Okay, next slide. And then the final one was the excess year life lost. So this is data which is produced by our colleagues in public health. And again, it indicates the gap between a Birmingham LSOA and the corresponding England rate. And again, is normalized in 0 to 1 range. So basically, we now have 5 data sets where we've normalized everything so that they all occupy each 20-meter cell has a value of 0 to 1. Okay, so it's there will be a continuous value in there. Next slide, please. The next bit actually is really, really simple. So this is the combined index, and all we do here is basically we put all of those raster cells on top of each other and we sum the values up. So we take the cells from the urban heat island, the flood, etc. We add them all together and we divide them by 5 and we end up with 1 value. And that's what you're now seeing on the screen. So you're now seeing that there is a range running from 0 up to 0.75. So 0.75 at the top end is the least preferable, and 0 is the most preferable area in terms of the combined index that we created. Okay, next slide, please. What we then did using some, that jumped quick, okay. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So what we then did was basically, having got that data at 20 meters, we then took our ward boundaries and basically we summed and we meaned all of the cells that fell within a ward boundary to give us a ward mean average. And again, so you can see there, I think the values on the table which go from 0.136, which is the most preferable, up to 0.45, which is the least preferable area. And then we just put the wards on top of that. But we could have done that with any arbitrary area. So now you could pick, although we've done this on ward, we could have done it on constituency, because basically we aggregate the data together into whatever the spatial unit is that you want to report on. Okay, and my final slide, please. Okay, and again, this just shows, this is another visualization of the data. This time we've got all of the wards in Birmingham shown on there. You can see, if you can read that. Oops. Are you okay? Somebody's got their hand up. Are we okay to answer the question
Yes.
at the end? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so you can see basically at 0.54, Aston, Nechells and Gravelly Hill have the highest mean value for the combined raster cell in the ward, which means they're the least preferable in terms of this measure. And at 0.14, Sutton Four Oaks has the lowest value and is therefore the most preferable or desirable. And perhaps that may not come as a surprise to people who actually know Birmingham. But the data, that is what the data shows. That has been very quickly how we ran through the mechanics of what we did. I can, if people want to take this offline, we're happy to do correspondence offline and talk you through more things. But I just, as I close, there are some things that I would like to say. We've been really excited to be involved in this work because it gives us a chance to showcase our technology and what we can do in terms of geospatial analysis, that we're more than just about putting data on a map. We'd like to continue to develop a better model. So for example, the model at the moment doesn't take any account of real walking distance. So it's a straight Euclidean distance. So there's no accounting for natural breaks, things like rivers, coastlines. So the model in that case is very, very simple. However, we have to start somewhere, and we can then we have ideas about how we could enhance the model as well. And that's it. I hopefully not lost too many people, and I'm happy to take questions.
Stephen, thank you so much, especially as lead analyst that Stephen was talking about did actually leave on Friday. So Stephen's juggling a lot at the moment, but still made time to come and talk to everyone today. So we really appreciate that, Stephen. There's a few questions in the chat. Already someone has said, we'd love to be in touch. Her name is Natalie, who's a member of the GIS team in Bournemouth. So we'll make sure that connection happens, Natalie and Stephen. I'm going to go to our first hand, if that's okay, to, I believe it was Councillor Ferguson. We just have a quick...
Yes, I think it was.
Yes, hi, welcome. Yeah, please do share your question.
Thank you very much for this. I thought it's a brilliant piece of work, actually, and I love the way we can ascribe numerical values to social justice. I think you just said that it's quite a simple model, and I wondered, well, two questions. Have you considered adding different weightings to the 5 different factors you used? At the moment, you just added them all up, which it's a good first guess. But perhaps those things might have different weights or different values. And the second question is, I think you alluded to it a second ago, but you said that it kind of met your expectations. But if I was doing a similar study in Cambridgeshire, I think I would like to have a priori guess of what we thought the most deprived regions were before we did the calculation, so we could check that it matched up with our expectations. You said it's happened here, kind of as an engineer. Guessing before I do the work is a good way of working, because then that way you can sometimes pick up. But I actually think it's a fantastic.
Okay, so
thank you.
Okay, so to answer the first question, yes, I think certainly with David and myself, there was a lot of we did discuss about weighting, but the problem we have with assigning weighting is what weights do we assign? And so we may need to look at other pieces of work. My team sit as part of a bigger data science team, and so one of the things might be how we work with other colleagues in data science to actually see what other information we can pull in to be able to actually maybe justify some of those weights. The bit about a prior knowledge, I think there's a danger you end up creating if you come with a fixed hypothesis of what you're trying. What we tried not to do was start with a hypothesis and then get the data to fit it. So whilst we're open for it to be challenged and for it to be enhanced, I think we'd really want other evidence. We'd look for independent evidence that actually backed up the findings that we've seen in the model.
That's a good point. I think it's a brilliant first iteration, so thank you very much for that, and I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any more questions people want to kind of ask? Do raise your hand. We have a few in the chat as well, Stephen. I'm just going to pull those up if that's okay.
Yeah.
So we had a question from Zoe about, in terms of our first indicator around access to green space, were we able to differentiate public open space from any green space in our first indicator?
In our first indicator, no. So it all got amalgamated. I believe it all got amalgamated together, but I will check. So the data set would have open space, as in what we consider to be true public open space, and there would be open field space, which may have restricted access, like a private playing field or something like that.
If I can just come in there, I thought I wasn't going to talk that much, but I've already broken that rule. So this was a really interesting point, Casey smiling, that was made by one of our councillors in Birmingham who belongs to Edgbaston Board. I'm just trying to, my eyes aren't good enough because everything is tiny on my screen at the moment because I'm presenting. But Edgbaston is kind of towards the south of the city and it comes up as quite green. So it doesn't actually have much, I don't think, from what I understand, has any council owned public space, but it's got a golf club, it's got Martineau Gardens, which it's free to enter but has restricted opening and closing times, and then another couple of sites that are privately owned. And the question posed to us was, well, even though my ward does relatively okay in terms of other statistics, a lot of my constituents can't access open space for free. And I'll just leave that thought there really with you guys, but we have got a response to that. But so it definitely you have to understand the nuances in terms of how the map is produced, and I think Stephen's really highlighted that. So also Tracy Ann's mentioned around IMD data is quite old. It is updated regularly, and I'm going to assume absolutely this map could be updated in the new plans. But we have a
workflow now, which actually we've now reached a stage with this where probably now, having gone through all of the analysis and working stage, where we could now productize what we would call productize this so that it becomes an automated process, and we just churn it out on a regular basis.
And this, if I can just kind of also share something else, was one of the reasons we really wanted to work with the internal GIS team. And it did take a while because we were in the middle of COVID, and the team is very small considering how large the authority is. Just like most of our teams now in Birmingham, they don't really reflect the size of the population that they serve. So there was a waiting list almost to kind of get Stephen and David's time on this, but it's so worth the wait because we've now got a process that's been done in-house. And as Stephen says, if we'd have bought it off a consultant or another company, yes, I'm sure they could have produced the same map that Stephen's team have done. But if we wanted to have it updated or built into BCC processes, that would have been so much more complicated. So that's been a really important lesson for us as well about taking the time to do it internally. So Andrew's asked, and I think you've already answered this question actually, Stephen, but about was the access data focused on as the crow flies, which I think you've confirmed.
It is, yeah.
I'm not even. Do I attempt to pronounce giggle? Is that what it is? I don't know if you want to come in, Andrew, on that. But you've mentioned that they're doing some good work on this.
Yeah, it's Green Space Information for Greater London, and they've got some clever software now that helps to do that network analysis, and so we now start to have a clearer picture of the actual walking distance from people to a park, because that was skewing a lot of, in Camden, for example, where it's heavily, very dense. It was having a big impact on how accurate that access data was.
Yeah.
So it might be interesting to have a chat with them.
Yeah, well, we as I say, we recognise that it is a weakness in the model. So walking distance is something we're using a lot at the moment. So, for instance, the reason I have to go at 2:00 is that I have to go to a Commonwealth Games meeting. And we're doing a similar sort of analysis there, where we've created all of the walking zones from within 30 minutes of all of the venues, and because of work that we did during COVID, we've actually extended the census data so that now we've started to spread census data in an LSOA out to residential properties. So we're able to make an estimate on arbitrary areas of what the population size looks like. So, for instance, going forward, adding in those techniques that we're already using in other areas, not only will we be able to tell you which parks you could walk to within 30 minutes, we'd actually be able to tell you the age breakdown of the population as well. So, as I say, we know that this is quite a simple one, and we know we can enhance it, but it was a question over time. And again, because of our background, we work in an agile way, so we go with what we call minimal viable product. So this is what we would consider to be an MVP 1, and we would then look to work with people to do MVP 2s and to enhance as we go, rather than sitting out at the beginning to do the Rolls Royce. But yeah, it's definitely worth talking to other people as well.
Fab, thank you. Thanks for that heads up, Andrew. That's really helpful to know that's been looked at by other people as well. So Tracy Ann, you kind of suggested, actually, is this should this be a national thing that we're looking at? And this really goes back to kind of, if I just flick back to one of Nick's earlier slides, this is one of the end games for us, is to actually change IMD, which is a massive thing to get to that point, which is why we want to work with DLUC, and we're going to be having some conversations with them next month, I believe, or later this month. A meeting has been diarised with them, but it's people are already putting in the chat some of the logistics around that. It is quite challenging, but I think we absolutely have to try. We've shown the importance of missing out kind of the whole green agenda in terms of IMD, and yeah, I think we have to really pursue a way to make it happen. So Nick, I think, wants to come in.
Yeah, it was just to clarify a couple of things. One was actually, now Stephen's cracked it, or David and Stephen have cracked it. Actually, it's not that difficult. Those data sets exist. Let's not overcomplicate it by saying we want walking distances, etc. Yes, we can get those in time. But the bigger picture is some of these wards are 50% down on what they should be anyway. That's the bigger picture. And also, what's the quality of the space when people arrive in it? So there's a much, much bigger, and that's what Amira is going to go on and talk about. So I think we have to be careful. So many national systems get deferred or delayed because they're not perfect. I think we should just crack on. And this changes the decision-making matrix of what and where is important in your city, as opposed to we have some green flag sites we want to keep as really high standard. We've got to think more broadly and as whole places around how should the collective resource be to target and improve the natural environment. And it's not necessarily about the detail at this point. It's about that bigger picture, and we mustn't get confused on that issue.
And our mantra across the whole FPA is is just give it a go, keep it simple, and do something, because we've faced this hurdle at every single stage of our programme, and I think Debbie's on the call as well today, our community facilitator, and we have broken things down to make them as simple as possible. So anybody now anybody, we've got members of GIS teams here. I feel really confident with, if you've got someone like Stephen in your in your directorate or your local authority, I'm sorry, but we can't clone him. I'm confident you guys could make a map like this as well. I completely hear that the challenges, but I think, as Nick says, if we'd have started off with those, we would never have got this. And Tracy Ann's also asked about other things that we debated. Yes, we debated so much, especially from the health perspective, the data. We could have, some of you might be familiar with FOF, Public Health Outcomes Framework. There's over 100 indicators that measure health. And at one point we were thinking, well, do we include 10 of these, 20 of these? But actually, some of them have only been updated. They haven't even been updated for the last 10 years. Others are not available at an LSOA level. And actually, when it comes down to it, the reason why I believe we all come to work, regardless if we work for a local authority, but the reason we come to work is to make people's lives better and to keep them healthier for longer. And actually, there's no better measure of that than excess years life lost. And that kind of data is available to any public health team if they've got a data person working there. So yes, we debated a lot, but it came back to simplicity again and again and again. Just absolutely, Councillor Ferguson wants to clarify as well. I'm not sure I should say this on a public recording, but I'm going to say it. I have thought about joining a golf club so that I can actually break all the locks and let people in. So, but yeah, that might not really go down too well.
No, it wouldn't. Not as a golf member. No, sorry.
I'm sure it will be rescinded straight away, my membership. But yeah, the lock's fixed again. But yes, I have a massive issue with them as well. But anyway, that's a whole other issue really for us. Councillor Ferguson's also asked about, would this work for rural poverty as well as urban? Absolutely. In terms of IND and excess years life lost, you could score really highly on those factors. So yes, it might not be so much of an urban heat island or maybe a flood risk, but and for us, I think what's really important, and I'm going to talk about this in the third bit of our webinar, is it's what you do with the data, actually, because even those places that are accessible, we know that people aren't using them. So we'll talk a bit more about that in the last part, if that's okay. So yeah, there's a few more. I think that's probably come to the end, I think, of the chat really. Okay. I was going
I just to finish, wanted to back up what you've both just said, which is, keep it simple, I think, and that's why I said we did delivered an MVP which is usable today. You then have to ask the question of bringing in other factors. Does it actually generate any extra additional value? If it adds no extra value, then you leave it as it is. There's no point in overcomplicating it just for the sake of it. Is it applicable to other areas? The answer is yes. Raster analysis is actually a very simple method at heart, but it's very elegant in what it allows you to do. It would allow you, for instance, to do this sort of analysis almost on a continental scale if you wanted to, at certain resolutions. So that's thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. That's me done.
A massive thanks again, Stephen. And it's a shame David's not here, and he kind of left on Friday. So he was, I remember when we set this webinar, he said, I'd love to have come, but I won't be working here anymore. But no, it's been a fantastic opportunity to kind of get to know another part of the council, actually, just as our whole FPA has been about working with other departments as well. kind of been able to work so close with the GIS team has been excellent. So I'm going to suggest we have a quick break, folks, if that's okay, until about 2 o'clock. Give you a chance to move about, grab a cup of tea or coffee, or use the facilities in your own home, and then we'll come back at 2. We'll just finish off kind of the next phase of the webinar, and we'll pick up some of the other bits of the chat that are kind of coming through now. So yeah, it's 13:55 on my watch. So yeah, I'll see you in 5 minutes, folks. Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, folks, hopefully most people are back. I'll just give it another minute. Okay, so for me, this is the most exciting bit, as much as the whole journey's been quite interesting actually as well, just all the thinking that's gone into it, and all the conversations and so forth. But for me, kind of, well, what was the point of us doing it? And I have to really acknowledge Debbie here. Well, somebody else has produced this kind of picture, but Debbie and my team shared it with me. And this for me just sums the whole reason why we're doing the FPA programme, really. So what you've got here is this whole kind of explanation of how we change from inequality to justice. So here you've got a situation where you've got a tree that's got apples on it, but the tree's bending towards the left. So the child on the right is getting all of the apples, and the little kid on the right isn't getting any. So equality is when actually, okay, you give them both the same opportunity to get the apples. So the same kind of ladder, same height, but the issue is actually all you've done is made it easier for the child on the left to get the apples. And then you start moving into equity, which is about actually where there's more resource that is needed. That's where you put the investment or you put the money or the time or what have you. So in this case, the child on the right has a longer ladder, so now he's got an actual chance of getting the apples, and the child on the left is getting them anyway. But justice, this is really what we're talking about, and it's explained so well here, I think, is where the person on the left that has more resource is actually using his own resource to be able to fix the situation for the child on the right. So what they've actually done as well, and in doing that, you fix the problem. So you fix the tree so that actually it sits straight and the apples are available to everybody. So I wanted to share that because if I was to choose one image that has really kind of resonated with me in the whole program, it's this one, and I just wanted to share it with the rest of the FPA program, really. And hopefully you'll be able to, if it's spoken to you like it has to me, we'll use it in your own presentations and webinars and things. So the environmental justice work is completely at the heart of our legacy for future parks. It's what we're calling our city of nature. CLT is our corporate leadership team in the council, and they agreed in August this year that yes, we absolutely should progress with this idea of Birmingham becoming a city of nature. What's really interesting here, though, is that the plan, originally it was going to be owned by our parks directorate, so city operations, but given the importance of this piece of work and how much it stretches across all of Birmingham and needs to be more than just about parks and green spaces, it's actually now sitting within inclusive growth. And a big reason for that is because we launched a vision back in January 2021 called our Future City Plan. And that talks about how Birmingham's going to become more livable, more easier and better to work in, study in, grow up in. And one of the key themes in that plan is a city of nature. We had lots of ideas for how we could become a city of nature, but there was no real action or plan to get there. So we're using the environmental justice map and the mechanism to kind of how we've got there to actually help us deliver the city of nature. Oh gosh, that's my mum. I'm so sorry. She's not supposed to be here. She's supposed to be at school to pick up Isa, but she's way too early. So it's completely thrown me. I'm so sorry, folks. So there's other work that's going on as well within inclusive growth that is linked to climate change. We've got a route to zero, which is how we're going to achieve net carbon zero by 2030. We're getting low traffic neighbourhoods more around the city as well. So there's all that kind of work going on. So it makes complete sense to actually couch all this work in this much bigger plan. And Nick, he started off by talking about, we've been so focused on kind of the whole parks and maintenance and the grass being cut, we've missed that strategic link. And this map is now speaking volumes across the whole council. Whenever we show it, people see that map and say, oh my gosh, that's the same issue that we see with children in the terms of if they're overweight or obese, or if their education needs aren't being met, or if they become a child in care. It's speaking to people about lack of employability and skills. So all those things, this map is just allowing those conversations to happen so much more easily. We need to kind of, the City of Nature, which I'll just share with you really quickly, we're testing it out in one particular ward in Worsley and Highgate. And this is essentially all, I'm just in the middle of a meeting, Mum. Okay, all right. Okay.
Honestly, at the same time, it's still last week.
Oh goodness! You know, most people have like Zoom calls with their children like flying in, landing on their lap. On this occasion, it's my mum. So anyway, right, back onto the webinar. So yes, we're going to be focusing on one particular ward, Worsley and Highgate. Now, Birmingham's got 69 wards. We are a massive city. I think we're not too dissimilar from the size that Councillor Ferguson, works in terms of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So it's a massive challenge that we've set ourselves up. But we want to apply the environmental justice kind of map that we've done and focus it on 6 wards across the city. And I'll explain that in a bit more detail later. We've done a lot of internal engagement, and we're about to launch our external engagement. It says 22nd there, but actually it's starting tomorrow, about the plan and what we're trying to do and how we've got there. And then we aim to go to Cabinet in February. So just to kind of talk a little bit more about, so we want to view our parks and open spaces and nature through a very green city lens. And one of the maps that Nick showed you earlier, let me just quickly go back here, this one. And then we gave you a bit of information about kind of Worsley and Highgate ward. A lot of our wards simply do not have enough green space. That is the simple fact. And if we're going to achieve environmental justice, we absolutely need to restore this missing green space, either been built upon or it's been sold or whatever else has been done to it. So this is a massive thing for us, that green city lens. We're looking at things from a healthy city lens as well. So not only do we want parks to be just places that people go to for their health and well-being, we want them to be places that actually activate health and well-being. So rather than go to a gym, we want you to go to a park. So we have elements of that happening around the city. Some parks are so well used and are brimming with activity to the point that you can't fit more stuff into them. That isn't happening in the red wards, and that's what needs to happen in the red wards as well. Now this is a really important. This is the pièce de la résistance, if you could say, for our City of Nature work. It's looking at this map and saying, right, what are we going to do about these red wards? So we've got 13 of them at the moment, and we've said that we think we can work on 6 over the next 5 years. And we've chosen 6. You can see like a little yellow line around 6 wards here, going from from Castle Vale down to Borstal Heath West. Starting off at Worsley and Highgate for lots of reasons, one of it being that it's at the heart of our East Birmingham inclusive growth strategy, where there's a huge amount of money about to come into that region to redevelop it and with a green space focus on it as well. 4 of the wards that are in this little area here are in our top 5 of most need, but they've also got 2 wards in between them, so it makes sense completely as one geography to look at them and how we look at it as a small area. And this is a small area for Birmingham. It's probably not that small an area for most local authorities. And you know, the idea is that Nick has come up with, kind of, you know, 40 years in the making, is to look at the parks and green spaces in those red wards. This goes back to Councillor Ferguson's question about accessibility as well. So just because there is public open space in our red wards, and just because there isn't like a river that cuts through it, or there's a train line or something, and these are all fully accessible, in terms of that people can walk into them, but we know that people aren't using them as well as they should be or could be, and that's because we believe that they just simply don't meet a basic standard. And so what Nick's been working on with other colleagues in the council is to come up with our own standard for a fair park. And this is really important because this is what links the map to action. So the map says, right, these are the areas you've got to look at. It just tells you where you start from. And then you start looking a bit further into those areas. So we've now actually audited 34 public open spaces in those 6 wards. They've all got a score. And the Fair Park Standard, Nick's doing some work on, actually, he's done a lovely video, which we can share with you. I'm sure he won't mind me sharing that, about what the Fair Park Standard is. He's putting together a manual as well in terms of, well, how do you carry out a Fair Park Standard audit? And, you know, the idea is that Fair Park Standard, it kind of looks at the park, going back to this very first slide, across all these themes. It looks at the park from a green city perspective. Is there enough nature, biodiversity? Is there enough green in the park? From a healthy city lens, is there enough going on to encourage health and well-being in that park? Is there enough access to that park? Is it welcoming? Is it, you know, has it got benches and things and stuff, and other things that would make it fair in terms of access? How involved are people around that park? Is there a community using it, loving it, protecting it, fighting for it? And from a valued perspective, you know, what is the kind of finance that's going in to support that park? So that's what's been done across the 34 sites here in these 6 red wards. Then also there's this whole, I've talked about involved very kind of briefly, but this is about community. It's about schools, it's about children, it's about families, it's about businesses. Are they actually taking an active role in that open space? And then the valued element really here is about how do we match up the finance in terms of supporting that park, not just from the council, but from external parts as well. You know, we've set up a City of Nature Alliance. So Casey, we've got our MOU out and people are signing it, so it is happening. So yes. Yes, so, sorry, yeah, that's taken a long time. But the point of me saying that is that in building that alliance, we've taken community organisations together who would never really work together that closely, have got an interest in green space, but what we've told them, we will give you some money, some funding, some grant to wrap yourselves around these green spaces in Borsley and Highgate and bring those parks to life. So going back to your question, Councillor Ferguson, about kind of the EJ map, would it work in rural areas? I would say absolutely, because just because you've got a park or a green space or a field that actually has no restriction on it, people won't necessarily just be using it. So the approach that we're taking, we think, while we're testing it at the moment, we've got 7 different members of the Alliance, all kind of descending onto Borsley and Highgate Park, being led round by one of Joe Hayden's team, who's on the call today, to talk to them about the parks so they can see what they could actually do together as an alliance, as a consortium. And that's what this environmental justice map is starting to make people do. This just shows some of the, basically, what the area of Borsley Highgate is. Some members of the National FPA team came to visit one of our parks that is on this hit list, Highgate Park. so much potential. All of these parks here have so much potential, but they've just not had enough TLC. This is what now our Fair Park Standard, all prompted by the EJ map, is allowing us to do. We've got 5 sites to sort out at the very, very first step, and then it's going on to the other 29 that we've identified across the other 5 wards. And we're just giving you a few examples here. We've started to look at the before and after, kind of trying to picture what it is that could be different in these parks. So I've just given Garrison Lane here as an example. But what you can see here, that kind of what's different in the before and after, is there are people using the park, and that for me is what accessibility is about. So one thing that our EJ map is missing is around quality of that green space. At the time of us putting together those maps, we didn't have a measure for quality, but we've got one now that we're testing out. So there's no reason why in a couple of years going forward, when we've started to audit more parks, we can start to feed that into that map to see how it might change the slight gradings. And this is what we're aiming for. So the Fair Park Standard, what it does is it comes up with a load of actions, assuming the park hasn't met the base, the Fair Park Standard. What are the actions that we need to happen to enable the park to be lifted? And we've done this for all of the 5 parks in Borsley and Highgate. I haven't included all of them, but we can share this all with you if you wanted to. And there's really simple things on there. If I can just highlight, this is where the welcome signboard and the community notice board is going to be. I cannot tell you. For some people, they don't even know they can use the park because there's nothing there to say come in. It's a bit like, if you had a community hall and like the doors were open, but nobody told you could use it, you probably wouldn't walk in. And it's the same with the park for some people. And all these actions here are aiming to make the parks more usable and more accessible, get a community around them. And just because we raise the quality of the park, it doesn't mean necessarily, if I just flick back, that we make we change the ward from red to green just by doing what we've talked about. The way we're going to do this is getting education and skills, getting employment and skills, getting public health, housing, planning. We've now got an operations group which has all those people on it, and they've never met before. They've never sat in a room before. We're going to try and get them together on the 3rd of December, but they've never actually been in the same room talking about one area of Birmingham and how they could collectively help and support the Alliance to make these parks, get to where they need to be. So it's a long process, and it's just starting. I kind of wish FP were going on another 2-3 years, and Victoria, if you can hear that, because it does feel all the work that we've done has got us now into a place where we can actually start to make some of these changes. But that's why it's a 25-year plan, especially for Birmingham because it's so big. So I think that is pretty much the end of the slides, and it's just to really say a massive thank you. I mean, the teams, my FPA team's brilliant, and they've all been involved in this to one extent or the other. But David Pike, who was part of Stephen's GIS team, he's the one. Without him, we wouldn't be talking today. Rupi, who left yesterday, is our landscape architect. She was heavily involved in actually doing all the site audits, and Simon Needle is our principal, and we're going to say it right, arboriculturalist. He was the one who really helped us get this conversation started in inclusive growth. So yeah, I'm going to pause there. If we've got 10 more minutes, if people have got any questions or comments, really happy to take any more. But but we're really happy to share, and we don't want this just to sit on a BCC kind of system. We'd love to see it happen in other places too. Thanks, Tracy Ann. Yeah, Nick, I was thinking that might put Valentin on the spot. Yeah, Valentin, I'm not sure if you if you're still on the call, whether you, from what you've heard, how you think it might land at DLUC, because you know, we need to find a way of making this a bit more mainstream if we can. I'm not sure if he's still here.
Yeah, hi.
Oh,
Yeah.
hello.
Hello, I'll put my camera on. Yeah, hi everyone. I think it's really good. I remember, because I actually used to work at Birmingham, and I remember just kind of how not mainstream the use of GIS is in terms of mapping, in terms of trying to figure out kind of how everything links together. In terms of trying to create kind of a national drive for it, I think it's a great idea. I think there might be difficulties around, for example, what technology different local authorities actually have access to, the levels of training within each local authority, because obviously Birmingham's quite big, so we kind of have that team kind of developed in that way. But in terms of like the concepts and stuff, I think it's really, really interesting. And I think, yeah, it's definitely something we'll look at.
Okay. Thanks, Valentin. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot more to explore here. And I'm pretty sure we've got a meeting with you and Polly coming up soon, so we'll be sure to follow that up with you. Do any other comments, folks? Sorry, go on, Zoe. Hi.
I was just going to say about whether there's links to nature recovery networks and biodiversity net gain. I think it's really interesting. We've been talking in Plymouth about the value of nature recovery in urban environments, and I think your environmental justice map could be used very much to advocate for that, which would be interesting. And also just thinking about going beyond parks to streetscapes and green walls and green roofs where there isn't much space. That'd be really, and I like it just as a tool, like the obesity, the Foresight obesity systems map in some ways. We try and delve into that in detail, but your mind boggles. But as a kind of advocacy tool, it's really strong. And I think, that on its own, your map could be a really good tool just as it is, without having to, delve into all the detail.
I'm going to bring Nick in because I know he's got a lot to say on this, but just in your point about green roofs and green walls, it's funny you mentioned that, Zoe, because when I've mentioned in passing about that we need to create more green space, and that is huge. That is massive, and not going to be achieved in a year or so. But we actually the National Trust FBA and the National Trust FBA team are helping us with a brief for a consultant around actually asking that exact same question about actually how do we, if we're going to create more green space, how do we do it more creatively? So green roofs, green walls, absolutely. And once we've got them, hopefully, how do we bring them into this kind of model? But yeah, absolutely. I'm going to bring Nick in because I'm sure he's got some comments to make to your observations as well, Zoe.
Yeah, Zoe, that's a really important point. I'm glad you've raised it. So we didn't show you a map today, but we have an ambition map drawn up for Birmingham with the Wildlife Trust Eco Record on nature recovery network ambition for the same 25-year period. Those scores as to where those ambitions lie in relation to the sites are then entered into the site audit, so that from a site point of view, we're cognizant of that. But also the ambition of the nature recovery is such that it's recommending making much better use of these internal green spaces that we've got and highlighting the need for connectivity and bridges and street connections and everything else. That is already included in our future city plan, City of Nature vision. So we're trying to provide the delivery framework for how that can come into being, and the finance scope that Amira's just referred to is part of that equation. We have the ambition. We have over 600 publicly accessible open spaces at the moment. Historically, we were known as a city of 1,000 trades. Our ambition is to be known as a city of 1,000 spaces, 1,000 green spaces. The gap is about identifying space as much as it is about creating space. So that's going to be brought through that whole climate challenge and the nature recovery. They're all part and parcel of that whole integrated approach. So you're absolutely right. And that's why I was trying to highlight at the beginning, this is one strand. Important though it is, it has to be linked to these other interrelated topics. But yeah, I'm glad you raised it. I think Donia has a point as well.
Yeah, this was your idea, so this webinar.
Is that me to come in? Sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of, hey. Yeah, no, that was so helpful. I think Nick's kind of answered what I was going to go and say as well. And for those that don't know me, sorry, I'm Donia, and I'm an ecologist as part of the Edinburgh Thriving Green Spaces project, which is the Edinburgh FPA project. And we've created something called Edinburgh's Nature Network that I've discussed with Hamira and with Nick. And we've got kind of like your environmental justice map in terms of ecosystem services. So we mapped like capacity and demand of 7 different ecosystem services, things, you know, like temperature regulation, water purification, all these kinds of things. And that's given us our areas like that are in the highest demand that we need to be making interventions in. But we also have a nature network as part of that. So what we're trying to do right now, and what I have a meeting literally in a few hours with University of Edinburgh about is having one map that kind of encompasses all of those things. So like the social side, the people side, their needs, but then also the wildlife needs and about connectivity. And I think what Nick was saying is that the environmental justice map is just one piece, and that you kind of have to cross-reference between the different strands. But yeah, we're going to try and do it all in one map, but I don't know if it's just too much information. Like, it's a lot of data, it's a lot of information to tell. But I'm meeting with the University of Edinburgh to talk about that later. So yeah, just thought that was worth mentioning. But yeah, no, it was really fantastic just to see a bit more detail, you know, behind everything that you showed when we were at the Derby event as well. So it was really helpful for me.
There's no other comments, folks. Can I give you 2 minutes of your life back to do whatever else that you need to do? Connect with nature, go water a plant. I don't know, go out and do some star jumps. But it's been so great to do this, and it's really nice to see some familiar faces after we met so many of you at the Cork Abbey event in Derby. So yeah, and I know we're trying to get some more face-to-face sessions booked in, and hopefully we'll do that before kind of the programme ends. So, but as Nick said, we'll talk to anybody who wants to talk to us, who will listen to us. So please don't be shy, and it'd be great to hear how you guys get on if you decide to do it and embark on it and so forth. And you know, Nick and I are here, as is Stephen. So just let us know. And I think the discussion's been really helpful as well. So that it's not just us who are going crazy with these questions, other people are asking them as well. So yeah. Right, I'm going to go talk to my mum now because she thinks I'm ignoring her. So she's picking up my baby today, so I need to be extra nice to her. So okay, thanks everybody. Great to see you all, and yeah, and a massive thank you to Nick and also Stephen for kind of presenting today as well. So bye guys.
Bye.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.